Good afternoon, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to this second edition of our training on research capacity building. Um, Yesterday, we heard from Professor Don, who spoke to us on the main theme of this session, which was building the next generation of early career researchers. Then, vis-a-vis using undergraduate students as a link bridge. And he spoke to us extensively on the aspect of how as undergraduates, how we can actually take the opportunity of developing ourselves, our profile, by engaging early in career. And he make mention of a whole lot of how we can do this. He mentioned that we can engage in commentary writing, and he equally mentioned that a whole lot of us have been doing research without we really know that this is research we are engaging in. And he encouraged us that we should actually translate those kind of reports, whether we are at the hospital, whether we are there's our students, whatever we observe, then also publicly available data. We could also curate them to become reports that we can publish, and those can actually add to our profile. He also mentioned that uh, another way which we can also engage in research is by interfacing with our assessors, our advisors, the professors, our lecturers in our departments, in our faculties, and in the school in general, by carrying them along so that they can actually nurture us, mentored us to become such researcher. And he also mentioned that one of the ways we can do this is by engaging in um, in collaborative kind of research, making sure that you are not a low ranger in this aspect. You must also engage in um, collaborative research that we make your work to be accepted by top journals. And he may mention that a whole lot because he himself is actually a managing editor, so he knows a lot about what it takes for a top journal to accept your paper for your manuscript for publication. So he also told us that that's why we must put our mentors, our senior colleague along to make sure that we engage, we have a meaningful outcome as the case may be. Then he also make mention that one of the reasons why you need to build your profiles early career researcher is because a whole lot of us we want to do our postgraduate outside masters or PhD as the case may be outside Nigeria. Just imagine you are coming, you may even have a first class and you are coming with just that first class, but there's no addition. But someone else has, let's say, 2-1, but has about 6, 7, even 10 publication in his field where he is actually intending uh, to do his master's or PhD. So you see that they will actually choose the person with a 2-1 ahead of the person with a first class with good publication. So that is actually another reason why you need to engage in quality research. So within a few moments, we are going to be bringing up our speaker, and he will be speaking to us uh, basically on what how you can actually engage in research as the case may be. Not just there are several aspects of research. So for such individual, for us as researcher, how do we actually engage in this kind of in research that we make our the outcome to be acceptable. So that one of the aspect he is going to be taking us on. He will be speaking to us on the aspect of how to write a quality in introduction, how to also look at how to look out for your gaps in already published article, because the truth remains that you are not the only one that has actually been that have done research in this regard. So you should be able to you should be able to actually know what has been done, what was not done, and it's from what was not done that is then going to uh, be your basis of actually doing this, where what you are going to be developing your research questions on. So he is going to be taking us on that, and within a few moments, he will be uh, joining us in the next 2 minutes. He will be joining us as the case may be. So I'm going to be introducing our speaker. Our speaker is someone that is well known, and he has actually involved in a lot of research. His main area is actually in infectious disease genomics, and his name is Testimony Olumide. He is presently a PhD student at Redeemer University, and also a research fellow at Africa Center um, for a Center of Africa Center of Excellence in infectious disease genomics in Ede, still at Redeemer University, and he have some very good quality publication. One of his publication just got published in Nature, which he actually um, co-authored with a whole lot of with a whole lot of others. So I'm going to I will be bringing him up soonest. Um, Testimony, welcome to the meeting. We've been waiting for you. So, can you hear me, please?
Yes, I can hear you. Good evening.
Okay. Yeah, good evening. So, without wasting much of our time, he will be speaking to us today on, his name is Testimony that is Olumide. So,
Olumade.
Olumade, sorry, he worked presently a PhD student rather at Department of Biological Sciences at Redeemer University, and he is equally a research fellow at the Africa Center of Excellence um, in Genomics of Infectious Diseases. So we are glad to have you speak to us today. So I'm going to yield the floor to him now to take off from where I stop. So I'm going to stop sharing so that he can share his screen. So testimony, please, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. I'm going to try. I don't know if everyone can hear me. Can we all hear me?
We can hear you.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much.
But if you can please increase the volume a bit, that will be fine. Yeah.
All right. Oh, sorry, I'm trying to share my screen here.
Okay.
Can we see my slide, please?
Yeah, your screen is up. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Leonard. I appreciate it. Good evening to everyone. Thank you for having me. First, I want to say a very big thank you to Mr. Leonard for this opportunity to speak to scientists, to researchers across Nigeria, and maybe also out of Nigeria. Thank you for having me. My name is Testimony Olumade. I'm a doctoral research fellow at the African Center of Excellence for Genomics of Infectious Diseases, situated at Redeemers University, somewhere in Osun State, Nigeria. And I'll be talking to us this evening on identifying research gaps and turning them into research questions. Um, I was part of the presentation yesterday uh, by Professor John Prisnell, and it was a very rich presentation. Some of the things I spoke to us about were how to become researchers. Basically, from our undergraduates, there are examples of people already into research, people already publishing. We all know that the evidence of good research is publication. The evidence of good research is, the outputs is publications, is research articles. I mean, you can do all the research in the world, but if it doesn't get out there, if it doesn't get to the desired audience, then no one knows you. Nobody knows you. We all know also that it is with research publications that you advance in your career as a researcher. And it's the same all over the world, particularly in academia. But then how do you get to this point? You only get to the point where you publish articles if you are able to comfortably and suitably identify research questions. A rule of thumb is that every article you find online in any database you check is answering a particular question. Every article is answering a particular question. But if you are going to have to publish your own articles, then you also must have your research questions. Now, I might also want to mention that from our younger ages, primary primary school or preschool, high school maybe, our teachers must have asked us, what would you like to be in the future? What would you like to be interested in? Some of us would have easily said, oh, I want to be a pilot. I want to be an engineer. I want to be a medical doctor. I want to be this. I want to be that. So many dreams at the time. Maybe that's not what we are doing right now. It's the same for all of us. I wanted to study medicine. I am doing a PhD in molecular biology and genomics. So we might not be doing exactly what we want to do, but the fact is that a we all have research. We have research fields that we are looking forward to being part of. For example, you want to be part of cancer research all over the world. You want to contribute your own quota to solving the problem of cancer worldwide, or you want to solve the problem of infectious diseases, maybe, or you want to solve the problem of other non-communicable diseases like hypertension, diabetes, and so on and so forth. So you are going to have to come up with research questions before you can come up with publications. I mean, no one just writes for writing's sake. Even when we had to write essays, like Professor Don Prisno spoke to us about yesterday in our secondary schools, and you have to write about, for example, how I spent my last holidays. Usually, it's okay for the lecturers to mark you down and say 9/10 or 6/10. It's not as though they spent the holidays with you, but what they are marking, how they are teaching us to write those essays, is the system, or you know the strategy by which anyone can come up with any research article, any publication. In the same vein, if you're going to have to publish, if you're going to have to be known in the scientific community across the world, you are also going to have to come up with research questions. But how do you find out what research questions are? You have to identify research gaps. So, how do you identify research gaps and turn them to research questions so that down the line you can come up with research publications? That's exactly what we'll be talking about this evening. If there are any questions, I would be happy to take them as I am going on with the presentation. So, I'll be talking to us about a few ways by which you can identify research.
Your slide is not, it's just we are not seeing your slide actually.
Oops.
You've not projected your slide.
Oh, I actually thought I was.
No, it's projected, but you didn't project your. You have to go and project
How about now?
your was your
Is it
your
clear now?
your PowerPoint. Yes,
How about now?
yes.
Oh,
So all you just need to do is to put it on presentation mode now.
I've done that. I put it on presentation mode. Is it not showing on presentation mode yet?
Yeah, but it's actually small. But I'm thinking, is it on? It's still okay. Yeah,
How
better.
about
Yeah,
now?
better. Yeah, better.
Oh, okay. All right.
Mm.
I apologize. I had it on full screen here. Okay. So what are gaps in research? Gaps in research are number one, areas that have not been addressed in previous studies. All right. So you're thinking, you know, about a research area, and it probably has not been addressed in previous studies. Okay, fine. You think you can do something about it, then that is a gap in research that you have just identified. I've tried to put a publication by the side here to show. So this publication was written by, or was authored, the first author is a colleague of mine at our lab, and uh, this is part of his PhD project, prevalence of hepatitis B virus basal cell promoter or precol region molecular variants among HIV and HBV co-infected and mono-infected patients in Ile-Ife, Nigeria. Now, in the whole of Nigeria, this is the only study as at now that addresses molecular variants of that BCP, basal cell promoter or precol region, amongst HIV and HBV co-infected and mono-infected patients. How did we come up with this? There's another study from Kenya, but because of the importance of that basal cell promoter and precol region in the proliferation of the virus, we wanted to look at what does the landscape of this look like within Nigerians, right? So we thought, okay, let us give it a try. Let us do this. Now, this area has not been addressed before in previous studies in Nigeria, and this is the first. But because we were able to identify a research gap, we were able to turn that into a research question and eventually into an article. So at any point during your studying, if you're able to find out or ask yourself a question, you go online and you don't find anything. And I must say at this point that you have to be very careful that it has not been addressed before, because there are probably several articles on that particular topic where you probably do not check the internet, or you're not checking databases well enough to actually find out if it's been answered before or not. But nevertheless, a research gap is still an area that has not been previously addressed in other studies. Secondly, a gap in research would be an area with insufficient or incomplete information. So maybe someone has actually done it. Maybe it has actually been addressed in previous research, but the information is not complete. We don't have sufficient information to be able to make a solid conclusion about that topic. Then you have just found a research gap. And you can turn that into a research question, depending on whatever field it is. And then you can now use that to come up with your own idea for a publication or for a study, whatever it is. It can even be your project. It doesn't have to be a publication. It can be your undergraduate project. It can be a mini project, whatever it is, right? This paper that was published last year in Nature Communications. Uh, so CRISPR, some of us might already know what CRISPR is, the CRISPR system of genome editing. So it has been used in the United States to check to detect viral RNA, to detect viruses in the samples of patients, basically. But then, number one, it has not been used in Nigeria. Number two, the disease is actually here in Africa. And then we are also not sure if the landscape of the country or the continent as a whole will accommodate the use of the CRISPR system in Nigeria to work on Nigerian samples. So we can see that this is insufficient information because number one, we know that CRISPR works. I mean, the person who discovered CRISPR recently won the Nobel Prize last year, right? So we know CRISPR works, and we know that CRISPR Cas13, to be precise, that Cas13 protein has been used in the United States, particularly on Zika, on some Ebola, Lassa samples, on monkeypox samples, and so on and so forth. But it is not yet in Nigeria. So can we say that that system as it works in the United States can also work in Nigeria? If we cannot say for sure, then that is a research gap that we need to address. And that was how this paper came about. So it can be anything else. You might be studying any particular topic, but the moment you notice that there is insufficient information or the information is just not complete, right? You can turn that into a research question and then have that as an idea for a project or a study. Number three, areas that limit a conclusion. If we remember last year when COVID became a pandemic sometime around March, it wasn't long before the world knew that Africa was special, in quotes, in the sense that cases were blowing all over the place in Europe, in America, in South America, also Brazil. Cases were all over the place. But in Africa, somehow we managed to stay below par. I mean,
Um, Testimony. Sorry to butt in.
projected. It was only
Hello.
mathematical modeling that that cases in Africa were going to be a lot. We're going to hit millions of cases by September 2020. But that was not the case.
Hello, Testimony. Please,
That
Mr. Testimony. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello.
can we still hear me?
Yeah, please. Can you increase um your volume? The people from the YouTube are actually complaining that they can't hear very well. You're actually muted now. You are muted. Can you unmute yourself, please? Hello? Hello, can you unmute yourself? Can you unmute yourself, please? Hello? Hello, the software is saying that your mic is not connected. Can you just remove your cord and reconnect it, please? Hello, Mr. Testimony. Hello? Please, we are sorry, he's actually having some technical challenges, so he's trying to reconnect back. Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, yes, I can hear you.
Yeah,
Can you
much
hear me?
better now. So, yeah, better. So you can share your screen now.
Okay. I'm sorry, I apologize for that.
No, that's fine.
Probably internet issues. I'm sorry, I'm trying to find my slide for this thing to project.
Okay.
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 I can't find the slide. Wait, just
What
a
do you
minute.
say?
Okay. All right. Can we see my slide now, please?
Yeah, yeah, it's coming up. So you can go on. So what you just do from your slide for it to be just go to slideshow, go to slideshow,
Hello.
slideshow. Hello?
Can anyone hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. I said just go to slideshow. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello? Hello? Go on, we can hear you. Please go on. Hello? Hello? Please go on, we can hear you. Please, can you go on? We can hear you. We can hear you.
All right then. Okay. All right. So I was talking about point number 3 on research gaps, and I was saying that a research gap or a gap in research would be areas that limit a conclusion. I remember that I was also talking about how during the pandemic last year, the world thought Africa was going to have a lot of cases, but we did not have so many cases at the time. But then it was we could not conclude. We didn't have enough evidence as to say why we were not having enough cases at the time. So people needed to conduct studies in Africa with on patients who were people who were positive, people who were infected, and see what it looks like. So what did it look like? What are the demographics basically? How are they infected? So that we're able to tell a better story as to how people were infected with COVID-19 in Africa and how we did not have so many cases. There were theories all over the place. Some said it was because of the hot weather. Some said it was because of the genetic landscape of Africans, because we are black, and so on and so forth. But then because we could, there, we could not conclude on COVID-19 in Africa, people began to come up with studies. Those in Kenya published one, and so on and so forth. And that was what birthed this particular paper that you see here in in the Journal of National Medical Association last year. Yeah, was last year, right? So you might also be reading any article, and then you come up with an area that you know that fine. They have come up with a fantastic study, and it's a very important conclusion. But you don't think this conclusion might be, might can you don't think the conclusion is general in such a way that the conclusion is limited. We don't have enough information to say that yes, this also works in some particular areas. Then you might have to turn that research gap into a research question if you are so interested and study it. Number four, number four here, areas that limit generalizability. So another gap in research would probably be studies where they have conducted the study quite all right, but because we cannot make a general assumption. You cannot say that this study would If you replicate this study in some other population or in some other location, it would give you the exact same results, probably due to the dynamics of that population or location. Then you have also found a research gap. For example, COVID in Africa, COVID in America. There are some differences. So you cannot generalize whatever you find in America and think it will apply in Africa. It just might not. In the same way, too, this also works for vaccines. A vaccine developed with patients from the United States, for example, might not work on patients here in Africa because of the dynamics of making a vaccine and the differences in location, right? So you may have found a research gap also if you find areas that limits generalizability in the sense that we cannot make a general comment on everybody, on the entire population based on what you have seen. Now, this paper in Nature Scientific Reports, also published last year, uh, we studied antibodies of Sierra Leonean and Nigerian survivors, and we're able to tell that these antibodies actually cross-react, right, from the different lineages of Lassa virus. We used to think that, because there are several lineages, there are several lineages basically. It's like saying there's a variant or there's a strain from different places, from Sierra Leone and Nigeria. So does it mean that if you are protected against a particular variant from Nigeria, you're also protected against a particular variant from Sierra Leone? Does that mean, so is that what we are trying to say? Does that mean that is what might happen? But because we are not so sure, we came up with this study. Because we could not, that area actually limited generalizability. We came up with this study, and here is the publication. So if you find areas that limit generalizability wherever you are reading or studying, then you just may have found a research gap that can be turned into a research question, right? So number 5 would be areas that limit decision-making ability of policymakers, patients, practitioners, right? So also, there might be studies out there, but when it comes to making decisions, when it comes to policy making, we may not have sufficient information, probably because we need to do a further study on on that situation so that you can have the full facts to make a policy. For example, you probably don't want to make a policy that says that a particular drug should not be used on all pregnant women in Nigeria. You probably also want to be sure that even if that drug is taken off the treatment regimen for all pregnant women, they are still safe, right? So if you don't have all of that information, then decision makers cannot make a decision yet. Policymakers, practitioners, they cannot make a decision yet. A very good example is malaria, for example, right? So um, artemisinin-based combination therapy was introduced sometime in. Yes, good evening. Oh, okay. Thank you very much. Sorry. All right. So artemisinin-based combination therapy, the drugs we know to treat malaria nowadays, say artemisinin, lumefantrine, and the likes, they were introduced in 2005, if I'm correct, in 2005. But then we see some resistance. Some people say some ACTs don't work for them. Some people say some artemisinin-based combination therapies, still work for them. Now, policymakers and practitioners in Nigeria cannot now conclude and say, okay, fine, all ACTs should be taken off the bench or off treatment regimen for malaria in Nigeria, since we are finding some resistance. No, they cannot do that yet. And why would they not be able to do that? It would be because they don't have all the facts to be able to do that yet. So if you think that you may have also identified a research gap where a decision cannot be made on any particular situation until all the facts are gathered, then you can also turn that gap that you may have noticed into a research question so that you as a researcher can study it. All right. So let me drop this at this point. That whenever you're studying, every question you ask is most likely going to be a research question. Every question you ask when studying is a research question, regardless of whatever it sounds like. But then, so how do you find research questions? I'm going to give us some useful tips on how you can find research questions, right? So number one, anytime you're reading an article, you might find a subtitle where they say suggestions for future research or recommendations for future research. There, they may have highlighted some gaps in research. Also, in many papers also where they talk about the limitations of the research or study, in some papers, they may have also identified research gaps. All you have to do is just read the paper and find it. For some other papers, it's in the conclusion. While concluding on the results and discussion of that particular article, they probably would conclude and say, okay, so while they may have come up with this particular finding, and so may also need to be researched on. That would also be uh, a gap in research. Now, those are the easy ones. How about the do it yourself? The ones that are a little not so easy. Number one is that when you're studying an article, you probably want to look at the significance of that research to the broader field, right? So you have found an article that's probably addressing children under the age of 5, and then you're asking yourself if this article or if this research area is addressing children under the age of 5, what might be happening in adults? If that is just that's a gap in research that you have identified, or you're looking at the author's argument and you think it needs more clarification, like saying that a vaccine, would probably would work all over the world, right? You probably want to be sure that it will work all over the world, right? So if you think that argument of the author needs more clarification, you have just identified a gap in research. Or you are asking yourself, what questions or issues has the author not addressed? And I think this happens nearly all the time if you're doing a critical review of literature, right? You would probably most likely get to a point where you are finding some questions that the author may not have addressed. And if you find those questions, those are gaps in research that you have identified. Or you are asking yourself, is there a different perspective I can consider? So if they are trying this particular drug, this particular system, this particular method, how about this particular method? Has it been tried? It's bringing a different perspective to the situation or the circumstance that you're trying to research on. Or finally, number five, are the methods used in that article outdated or no longer considered valid in your field? There was a time when we used to think that people who are sick probably just have malaria. But now there are other ways of finding that there are even hemorrhagic fevers that present as just malaria. Or look at COVID-19 that presents as just malaria. You don't want to just conclude that because someone is feverish, they have malaria. You probably want to do a little more investigation, right? So if you find methods in papers that you think are outdated or are no longer considered valid in your field, then you probably want to repeat that particular research, but use a more recent or a more current method in addressing that same question. Now, you think you may have identified research questions while doing your study, while doing your reviews and the rest, while going through research papers. How might you address these research questions? There are two major methods really: the quantitative and qualitative research methods. The third one there is a mixed method research, where you probably want to have a bit of some, maybe the quantitative side and the qualitative side, so that you can arrive at a wholesome conclusion at the end of your study, at the end of your project, at the end of your research, right? The quantitative research method would always collect numerical data in the form of numbers. Qualitative research method is usually concerned with human behavior. So more, you have more, uh, you have more qualitative outputs in the sense of media, maybe experiences, words, and so on and so forth. So I'll speak about them very briefly. So qualitative research method. The qualitative research method is used to understand how people experience the world. And there are common approaches to qualitative research. Like I said, this will just be a summary. It will take a lot of more time to go in detail to explain all of these approaches and all of the data collection methods, but this can introduce it to us, and then maybe you can do a further study on what each of these on how each of these research methods are used to answer gaps in research, right? So the first approach to qualitative research is the grounded theory. And for grounded theory, usually a researcher picks a topic of interest and you develop a theory around it. So you collect enough data, and then what theory do you think you might get from that qualitative research? So you explain it. For ethnography, you're probably considering culture. For example, what exactly do we think is particular to Amazon? What makes Amazon such a beautiful organization that they can grow to be the most valuable brand in the world? That is ethnography. You want to study the organizational culture. What are the things that they do? What is particular to Amazon that you think makes them so successful? Action research. For action research, you are probably looking at a research idea, a research topic where you want it to implement practice. So, for example, you want to discourage young people from taking cigarettes or alcohol, for example. That is action research. So in a way, the output you will get from that, do you take it, yes or no? Do you take alcohol? How do you feel when you take alcohol? That's kind of output you will get, and this is qualitative data. Or phenomenological research. So if you want to do a phenomenological research, you're probably looking at a phenomenon where you're trying to describe the experience of people, right? You're trying to find out how people have how people relate their experiences. So you're trying to describe a phenomenon, how people see it, right? How people experience those things. And it's similar to a narrative research. The only difference is that with a narrative research, you're looking at how these people interpret their experiences. So it is one thing to describe your experience, it's another thing to describe the experience. So what did the experience do to you? Say, for example, victims of a hurricane. They lost their homes, they lost families, maybe they lost properties, and then you're trying to get them to share their experiences. So what did it do to them? How did they feel? How were they able to cope? You are most likely doing a narrative research. Now, how do you collect data with qualitative research methods? You might use observations. For observations, you're probably recording what you have seen, what you have heard. Interviews, you're sitting and asking questions one on one, or focus groups where instead of a one-on-one discussion, you are now asking a group of people. It might also be an open-ended survey. Open-ended surveys are questions, surveys that have questions that cannot be answered with just yes or no. So they need to be a little more explanatory in the way they answer their questions. Or other secondary data collection methods such as text images that are already available that you just want to work on to answer your research question. Now, what methods might be used to analyze qualitative data? So sometimes you begin by organizing the data. With organizing data, you're probably transcribing. So take, for instance, you record an interview. You need to write out the things that your participant said. That is the point of organizing data. Then maybe you're now reviewing and exploring data. At that point, you're probably looking for patterns or repeated ideas in the way that they answer your questions. So the way that they answer your questions, what messages do you think you actually can pick from all of the stories that they are telling? At that point, you are reviewing and exploring the data. Then after that, you most likely will develop a data coding system where you assign codes to these ideas that you think you're getting out of the response of participants. And then you now identify recurring themes. So what things do you think these different participants in your study keep repeating? If they're repeating it, then you probably want to hold on strongly to it as an output from your study. So basically, that is how qualitative research is usually carried out. At the end, you come up with themes, you come up with ideas, you come up with patterns that you can then go back to tell the world. So you can study victims of a hurricane, for example, and come back to say, hurricane gives some people post-traumatic stress disorder after a while, because 10, 15, 20 people out of 30 people maybe kept on repeating the fact that they suffered these things after the experience. That would be qualitative research. Now, how about a quantitative research? A quantitative research would be used to find patterns, averages, make predictions, test causal relationships, and generalize the results to wider populations. In this case, it is numbers that are collected. as data, right? And you have to analyze those numbers, find patterns, find averages, predict, right? The common approaches to a qualitative research are usually going to be descriptive, correlational, or experimental. Now, usually for descriptive research, you're trying to just find out a summary of your study variables. So you have collected these numbers. What is the summary? What does it look like? So you can easily say that, okay, proportion of my study, for example, there are 60% males, there are 40% females, So you can have a descriptive research, that's what it would mean. So basically, just an overall summary of your study variables, it would still be quantitative, right? So correlational research. So for correlational research, you are investigating the relationship between study variables. For example, does weight affect BMI? For example, does race or skin color affect how we respond to drug treatment? As an example. So when you're trying to check for relationships between two or more study variables, you are carrying out a correlational research. For an experimental research, this is a little more systematic in the sense that you're trying to find out if there is a cause and effect relationship between variables. So does a change in this cause a change in this? And you most likely would have to conduct this through a more complex method. That is why the next point here says that data collection method here is more complex and depends on the study design. So you probably want to try this quantitative research method by collecting data. It depends on how you design the study, really. And there are several ways to design quantitative research. Analyzing data from quantitative research can either be descriptive or inferential. Descriptive statistics basically will be looking at a summary, but this time you're probably measuring averages, variability, mean, median, mode, where you're just getting proportional. You're just trying to observe variables. So maybe ranges, maybe you're drawing a graph to just show proportion, to make your data more you're giving the variability or averages of your data. So how do they vary from each other, for example? That would be descriptive because you're basically just describing. Inferential statistics are these
All right.
by testing hypotheses, right? You're trying to make correlations, maybe regressions. These are more complex statistical analytical methods. And all of these are methods that you can use to analyze data in a quantitative research. So um, so far so good. We have been able to go through how you can identify research gaps while studying and how you can also convert these gaps to questions. At the back of your mind, you probably just want to know that every time you are studying, you don't even have to be studying. If you're just thinking and you're asking yourself, might this be a question? Once it comes to your mind as a question, you have most likely come up with a research question. Someone said that every day we ask at least 200 questions. Every day we ask at least 200 questions. You're just walking on the street, for example, and you're asking, why is this person behaving this way? That's a question you have just come up with, right? And then these questions that you come up with, you can convert into studies or projects that you can later work on. And
Mr. Testimony, I have to button in. Our time is up.
yeah. So on that note, I have come to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. It was a
Thank
pleasure.
you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you
Um,
so much.
I
Yeah.
can take questions now if there are any.
Yeah. Basically, the questions that I have, one of the questions that I have is, how do you turn your research question into a catching topic? That's one of the questions that one of the participants asked. How do you turn your the research question you are asking into a researchable topic rather?
How do you turn a question into a researchable topic? Right?
Yes.
Okay. So if you have found a question, beautiful. I think that's the number one step. You have a question. You probably now want to look at the variables. So consider your question very well. What are the things that I need to answer this question sufficiently? Do I need a laboratory? Do I need to send out surveys? Do I need uh, answers from people? Do I need experiences from people? So, take for example, we want to find out in this COVID-19 pandemic, how have people been surviving physically? How have people been surviving? Now, yeah, I have a research question because I've just thought about it. I would like to know how people are surviving. So, I consider the question and say, what are the things I might do to provide sufficient answers to the question? Let's say you can answer that question is actually ask people to tell their experiences about how they have been surviving the pandemic. So you probably want to send out surveys. So you design a survey. You can leave the name out for ethical reasons, right? So that their names are not shown on the questionnaire. And then you say, okay, fine. Where are you? What states are you from? What do you do for a living? How much do you earn a month? Has the pandemic affected your job so far? If yes, how have you been coping? And you give options or leave it open-ended in such a way that they answer themselves, right? And you can come up with questions like that, get responses of people, analyze it. So 10 this percentage from the north, this percentage from southern Nigeria, and then 10% of people say they cope with personal jobs, 10% of people say they go remote, so they're working online. Another people say that they are interested in, for example, you have answered the question and you can publish the findings. And that is just an example. So it's not very difficult. You just need to consider your research variables, find out the things that you think you need to answer these particular questions. Maybe seek advice from someone who's a little older, a more senior researcher, and you're good to go. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. I think that was one of the basic questions that we have. We may have to take the other questions um, um, at the other platform because of the second training will be coming up in a moment. So we have to bring this to an end. But you can always reach out to our speaker on LinkedIn. Can search for his name on LinkedIn, and you can equally reach out to Ross on the is actually not our platform, so you can equally reach out to him. And also, lest I forget, he also happened to be the director of research at Research Hub Nigeria. So we can see is someone that is very experienced when it comes to the issue of research. You can see that from all the quality publications that he published and he co-authored with other researchers. So we want to appreciate you, Mr. Olumide, for joining in for this session. So we hope to see you, more of you at the time, if time permit us. So I'm just going to take a shot of us now. So I'm going to turn up my video. So I just take a shot of us so that, uh, all right. So, so I'm going to just 1 minute. So I'm coming, just give me a moment. All right, we are good to go. So thank you so much. For those of us who are on this platform, will be joining in for the second training. So can just log on to the second link for the training. We are starting right away because of time. So we want to thank you, Mr. Olumide, for joining in for this great training. We see you some other time. I thank you for all you are doing for Research Hub and all you are doing for research in general. Thank you and God bless you.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir.
All right. Thank you.